So basically places around 3 a.m. in New Orleans. And some people in my comments said that this has happened in other states across the South where it's like things are just shuffled around. Certain things disappear, places. You could be in a bar or something, and then you find out that that place has never existed. You can't find it anywhere.
Now, our poster Candy Cane starts out this TikTok by saying that this is not abnormal for the South. Specifically in New Orleans, places will glitch and change and disappear. And one night, this poster and her friend are going out to the French Quarter. Neither of them are drinking, stone cold sober, because the friend of this poster had to drive. And this is how she got dragged into a bizarre, like, warp of space and time.
When we get there, we park the car, and this was the first time I'd ever seen this feature on the phone where you can set where you parked your car so you can find it again. Because I started to walk away and she's like, hold on, like, let me set it. So I'm like, oh, that's really cool. Like, she explained it to me. I'm like, that's really dope. And I was like, well, I would have noticed where we were because the building was really specific and there was a cowboy. I'm going to show what the cowboy is. I'm from the country. We're both from the country. So I'm used to seeing this in people's yards. It's not really common to have this like cutout display in like the city and in New Orleans, but I'm familiar with it. So I'm like, oh, I would have noticed this distinct building and the cowboy. I don't know if I can insert a picture. I'm okay, so this is what I mean by the cowboy. This is just like a yard display, and it was propped up against this building. Now, this is just something insignificant that I thought it was just insignificant that I just mentioned. We have a good time. Eventually my feet start hurting. I'm like, all right, let's go. I want to get in the bed. I want to eat. Like, I just want to go. So the car should not have been far. We start walking and she's like, for some reason, like it's not even popping up. It's like I didn't even set it. So I'm like, that's really weird. But I remember the street name. I remember the distinct buildings. I remember things. So I'm like, we're going to find it. Like, don't even trip. So we start walking. Lord, we walked around for hours.
They walk around for hours looking for the car. The poster's maps aren't making sense. Her friend's maps aren't making sense. They can't find this car. And these are grown women who very clearly, like, this is abnormal, right? Like, this is weird. They're both sober. Obviously, they can't find the car. Their maps are messing up to the point where, like, they can't even figure out how to get to where they were going. So hours of this pass. They are literally just walking the streets of New Orleans until finally something catches their eye.
So we see the cowboy and the building at the exact same time. I go to say something, Lord, and it's like we had been faked out so many times. I kind of didn't want to say something, and like we still weren't in the right place. Like, it made no sense. Lord. So I see the cowboys like across the street. So I'm like, I know that the car is this way on this street. So I'm like, all right, cool. And I'm about to say something, and I don't know if she gasped or what, but we look up and we see the cowboy that's still there in the same spot that it had been. He gets up, just the shadow gets up and starts walking across the street to where we are. So when she kind of like, I felt like she was going to say something, I just grabbed her hand and I'm like, it's okay. So I'm just like rubbing her hand. And if like women, we know, even if it's terrifying, somebody has to step up and be like the brave one. So I was being the brave one because I didn't want her to start like freaking out. So I'm holding her hand and I'm just like rubbing her hand. I'm like, it's okay. It's okay. Everything's all right. I'm like, just cross the street with me. So I hold her hand and I take her and she's like stiff. So he's crossing the street this way. We cross the street that way. So we go like a little bit away. When we make it to the little building, I turn, bam, the car's right there. We must have approached this little area from every which direction for hours. Never came across the car, never came across the cowboy. After he like crossed, I kept my head straight. I'm just like holding her hand. I'm talking to her. I didn't watch it. I don't know. And it wasn't until I told this story, like I uploaded it yesterday on the long form content place. It wasn't until I told that story that I made the connection that possibly us crossing it might have been how we got out of that weird little loop. But it's been years and I hadn't made that connection until yesterday.
That is so terrifying because I have that same feature on my phone, the one that saves where your car is parked, and it's suddenly not working anymore, like not even showing up is weird in itself, almost like they weren't in their own reality. But then the cowboy, like this cowboy cutout, starts walking. Like when she talked about that, my body just, ugh, it is so unnerving. I had like a physical reaction from that. And she had to be the strong one in that situation, but I can't even imagine how terrifying it was. Now, Candy Cane elaborated on this further on the 3 a.m. Vanishing Act of the South. And I thought that her explanation was really, really interesting.
So there's a freaky phenomenon that happens in New Orleans where businesses and buildings, and sometimes people, tend to disappear and reappear and disappear once more. How this happens, it depends on who you ask. But one thing remains the same. This really does happen. Some people call it card shuffling. And a lot of times this happens in the French Quarter, which, as you know, is a hot spot for paranormal, supernatural activity. A lot of accounts say that this happens around 3 a.m. And some people said that they've experienced this around Savannah, Georgia, and some parts of Florida. But I know for sure this happens in Louisiana.
There were some people who stitched this and said, yeah, the South plays disappearing acts. I also find it interesting she mentioned Savannah, Georgia. That place being a location where people like glitch through timelines and things disappear and reappear, that makes sense to me. If you've never been to Savannah and you've never been to New Orleans, they feel kind of similar to me. The energy there is just unexplainable.